Exosomes are blowing up in Korean beauty in 2025. Clinics are selling exosome facials, serums are bragging about containing 75 billion exosomes, and TikTok content creators are promising collagen, healing, and glow. On today's episode of the Korean Beauty Show podcast, we are going to go behind the headlines to unpack exosomes in a little more detail. What they are, what's being promised, what the evidence and regulations actually allow, and how this plays out across markets. So welcome back to the show if you are rejoining us again. If you are new around here, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lauren Lee and I am a Korean beauty expert and industry consultant. I work with businesses all around the world with my consultancy Style Story, and I also run my own Korean beauty brand Jellico. Now, before we jump into all of this, it is quite wordy. This is one of our deep dive episodes, so we will be going into a lot more detail in this episode. I am not a scientist, I'm not pretending to be one, and I am not offering medical advice. I am actually a lawyer by trade. I worked in the legal services industry for 12 years. So the focus of this episode, in addition to giving an overview about what we're really talking about here, is to go into some of the legal compliance and regulatory aspects of exosomes in Korean skincare and the markets where they're commonly sold as well. And what I do actually want to do is then bring on a dermatologist for the clinical part of this. And so I'm planning a separate episode for it. I'm just going to put it out there right now. We are already halfway through November and there is no way I'm going to be able to get that episode ready before the end of this year, just because my schedule for the rest of the year is crazy. So I will try and have that together and ready for you for 2026. It has been a pretty crazy year this year. I'm not going to lie. It's been a busy one. So we're just not going to get there this year, but I would actually like to do that. And I have someone in mind that I would really like to invite onto the show to talk about his experience with using exosomes in clinic for that episode as well. All right, so let us jump into it. And I'm going to assume that a lot of our listeners, like myself, are not scientists either. So I am going to do the best I can to explain this. One of the things about being a lawyer is that we often have to get our head around things that are not our area of expertise. So, throughout my time as a lawyer, I've had to jump down very, very deep rabbit holes for a lot of things. I did construction litigation as part of my practice for a long time, and that involved talking to a lot of engineers. So I'm broadly across, for example, how to build a tunnel, even though it's not something that I myself know how to do. So I'm going to try my best to do this justice. If we have any scientists in the audience, no doubt they will let me know if I get any of this wrong, but bear with me. So in cell biology, exosomes refers to a very narrowly defined class of extracellular vesicles. So what we're talking about here is things that are secreted by our cells. And there are other particles that are secreted by our cells, but exosomes are one of them. So bioscientists use the word exosome in a much tighter sense than many popular uses. So when you hear this term being thrown around in skincare, it is probably being used in a very, very different way to how a bioscientist would describe it. So in a cell biology laboratory, exosomes are defined by their inclusion within a highly specialized subset of extracellular vesicles. Let's call them EVs. These are small lipid-bound particles released from cells. So if that all sounds very scientific and gobbledygook to you, you are not alone. But basically what we're talking about is, in research, exosomes are a very specific type of EV, a tiny packet released by cells. In practice, my understanding is that it's actually very hard to prove the exact subtype of exosome that we're talking about once they are isolated. So many researchers use broader terms like small EVs to describe them. Now, why are we even talking about exosomes in the first place? Like, what has captured popular interest and attention in these? I think that was one of the main questions that I had. So, in a nutshell, the science around exosomes has evolved quite quickly, but there are many scientific questions that remain unanswered. So, the human body contains some 35 trillion cells, and if we assume that each cell produces about 1,000 exosomes in a day, that equates to 35 quintillion exosomes in our bodies. So we're talking about many different types of exosomes from many different types of cells. Every cell produces unique exosomes with unique characteristics and contents. So, for example, exosomes produced from cancer cells are likely to lead to more cancer, and exosomes produced from stem cells are likely to promote anti-inflammatory and regenerative activity. So that, I think, is where a lot of the curiosity, interest, and research around these came from in the first place. So cancer-focused scientists have been seeking the biomarkers for early detection of cancer and for monitoring the recurrence of cancer for many years. If you or anyone in your family has ever had cancer before, you will know that part of being in remission is monitoring for reoccurrence. And I know for someone in my family, that has been something that they are looking for, the markers to see whether it has returned or not. So exosomes offer a potential solution because they are produced, the exosomes produced by cancer cells are different to the non-cancerous host cells, and are thought to play a role in the cancer growth and eventual metastases. So this information, I am going to have the sources where I am using information from other people. So I'm going to put all of those in the show notes if you want to go and have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So I think that you can see just from that alone that we are talking about a whole lot of different particles, materials, and sources, and those mixtures aren't all the same. So when a product says in the beauty context that it contains exosomes, it's invoking a precise scientific term for what is a very non-uniform mixture. Now, the other thing is that these are not new. This science has been building up over many years, and it has been researched and talked about for many years, but there are many areas that are still unknown. It is an emerging field. So why is there this sudden interest in exosomes? So James Edgar from the Cambridge Institute for Medical Research was writing a few years ago now, but he thought that there were three reasons. Number one, they're thought to provide a means of intercellular communication and a transmission of macromolecules between cells. And second, that in the past decade, which he was talking about 10 years ago, so, over the last, say, 20 years, exosomes have been attributed roles in the spread of proteins, lipids, mRNA, miRNA and DNA, and as contributing factors in the development of several diseases, which is what we were just talking about. And third, they have been proposed to be useful vectors for drugs because they are composed of cell membranes rather than synthetic polymers, and as such are better tolerated by the host. So that is, in very broad brush terms, what we are talking about. And you can hear, even from that description alone, that it is a bit of an amorphous concept and refers to potentially a lot of very different things. So the fact that it has managed to be packaged up into this really neat terminology to be whacked on the front of a skincare serum, I think tells you a lot already about how people are oversimplifying this and sort of pulling out the cherry picking the parts they like to market products a little bit better. So how they are made and why stability is difficult, because I think this really comes to the heart of one of the key issues with exosomes, particularly in a beauty setting. So there's how labs separate them when they are doing research, and then there's everything else. So scientists basically have a couple of different methods for pulling out these tiny exosomes, these tiny bubbles. They use ultra-fast spinning, they use fine filters, special columns, and each method grabs a slightly different mix and can bring along hitchhikers, so to speak, so stuff that isn't the target vesicle. There's no perfect method, there's no one-size-fits-all method. So in science at the moment, the best practice is to say what you did to get them out. Say how they were separated and what's actually in the sample, a rough count and size of them, the right marker proteins, and check for the common contaminants. So that is basically, at a very simplified level, them in science. But there's a lot of issues around stability for these. They don't love heat or light, and they don't like to be repeatedly frozen and then thawed. So that can damage them. So in research, they are usually kept ultra cold and handled in very, very specific solutions. So cosmetic serums and creams, by contrast, sit at room temperature for months. They travel through hot warehouses, in the back of postal vans. They can be opened daily, which is very, very different to how scientists need to use them and handle them. So there's also papers that show the difference between freeze-dried vesicles from certain sources, and in some circumstances they can be brought back and look intact under tight controls. But that is not the same thing as being able to provide a blanket guarantee for every exosome on the shelf in, say, just a consumer goods product. So the plain English or very basic level takeaway is that keeping particles like this whole and active in a finished consumer formula is very difficult. And really, in a more scientific setting, you would need to be able to show exactly how the product was tested, stored, all of those kind of things, rather than just referring to the raw ingredient and saying, woohoo, here's an exosome. It's like that's just a tiny part of the bigger picture with all of this. So I think that then I had a lot of questions myself when I was sort of reading through this and what it all is and trying to kind of make sense of it, because there are so many questions I think that are still unanswered. So one of the things that you will see if you've seen any of the stuff on TikTok or social media is, skincare products with exosomes, they boost collagen. They heal the skin faster. They reduce inflammation. They make other active ingredients work better. They fade pigmentation. So what does the evidence actually say so far? And the reality is that most of the strong data is preclinical. So lab and animal studies suggest that certain EVs can nudge the cells that are involved in repair, which is encouraging, but it's not the same thing as saying that we have proven results on faces. So there are some human studies that exist, but they are small and specific. And the clearest signals that we have at the moment, circa November 2025, are that they are post-procedure helpers. So they work the best on human faces after laser and microneedling, which is where the skin's barrier is intentionally opened. And that is obviously very different from an everyday standalone formula like a serum or whatnot. So topical use on intact skin at the moment is still a question mark. Getting intact vesicles through the barrier without help is still not well established, and assisted delivery shows more promise than just sort of applying it and going on with your day. So the products and the methods vary a lot, and basically the key takeaway here is that we need larger, higher quality human trials to know reliably what works, at what dose, and for whom. So there is plausible biology and some encouraging data that exists, but for standalone retail serums on intact skin, the clinical evidence is still limited. So I think the better way to deal with a lot of this stuff is to treat the claims as possible, but not yet proven. So the other big thing that I came across when I was researching this and have been looking into it, because this affects the regulations, is whether the exosomes are human-derived or not. And there's been, crackdowns in Korea on this year, and a clarification of what the regulations actually permit, which led me to question, well, what does it matter if the exosomes are human-derived or not? And in a nutshell, it is because they are treated differently depending on whether they are, plant and synthetic versus human. But exosomes themselves are not inert ingredients. They carry signals, proteins, RNA, all of the stuff that we just discussed. And that is exactly why they are exciting in regenerative medicine, but also why regulators are cautious about them. Because if an ingredient can influence cell behavior, that crosses into the territory of affecting structure and function, which is a drug behavior, not a cosmetic. And that is why they are being used in regenerative medicine and in cancer settings or whatnot. That is why people are so excited about the potential for exosomes. So plant or synthetic exosomes are treated differently for a number of different reasons. Basically, they don't pose the same human biosafety or ethical issues, and they are generally seen as chemically defined and not biological ingredients, which then influences how regulators treat them as well. So regulators treat them more like an emulsion, a liposome, or a delivery system rather than a living cell derivative. And that's why you'll see so many plant exosomes or exosome-inspired claims. They are mimicking the concept of exosome signaling, but without triggering the human tissue-related issues and bans and whatnot. But there's also a difference. We humans are not plants. And although plants do release tiny membrane vesicles that look like exosomes under a microscope, is that really the same thing? So they can carry RNAs, proteins, and lipids too. So sometimes researchers do call them plant-derived EVs or exosome-like vehicles, but most scientific papers are very careful about phrasing them as exosome-like because we don't know yet if plant vesicles share the same formation process or signaling functions as animal ones. Makes sense, right? We're not plants. So that then brings me into the regulatory environment and how the regulators are treating exosomes. So let us start out with the Korean regulations, because a lot of these products come from Korea. What does Korea actually say about this? So very interestingly, Korean regulators have actually tightened the cosmetic advertising around this, and using the term exosome in cosmetic ads was prohibited from January this year to curb basically misleading claims. And the MFDS does what it usually does, which is pull out examples of advertising that is not okay and put out a notice basically telling industry what you can and can't do. So exosome treatments for medical purposes in Korea are regulated as drugs or biologics. And part of the reason that they decided to crack down on the use of this word in cosmetic advertising was, number one, because it sounds like medicine. So when brands highlight them, it makes the product itself sound like a drug or a medical treatment. And under Korean law, as in many other countries, cosmetics cannot be advertised in a way that could mistake them for medicine. And we've seen this before with other popular trending ingredients like spicules, which were being called microneedling in a bottle. And the MFDS similarly issued notifications basically saying to industry, not okay. You can't say it's microneedling in a bottle because it's not a medical procedure. That's not what it actually does. That's not how these products work. You're not allowed to advertise them as though they are, because it's misleading to consumers. The next reason they gave is for safety concerns. So real exosome products would need extremely strict checks, sterilization, clinical trials. Cosmetic ingredients do not go through those same safeguards, so there are, concerns about potential side effects. The number 3 reason was consumer confusion. The phrase exosome cosmetics makes people think that a product definitely contains human-derived materials, which may not be true, and therefore it is misleading. The other reason we've already touched on, it's outside the scope of cosmetics. So cosmetics in Korea are legally defined as products that cleanse, beautify, keep the skin in good condition, similar to the regulations in the US, in Australia. Claims about exosomes often suggest effects that go beyond that definition. So it's not allowed, it's not okay. And false or exaggerated claims, which is a big area that the MFDS is concerned about. They have already caught many stem cell derived cosmetics making wild promises. And because that's misleading, they decided that Korean brands can no longer use the term exosome in their cosmetic labeling or advertising, and suggest that it has basically human-derived exosomes in it. So that is sort of where Korean regulators have landed on this. Now, the law does not specifically or explicitly forbid plant-derived EVs, and brands are leaning hard on that loophole, as you probably have seen if you've been on social media lately. Every brand at the moment seems to be releasing a product like this, and that's how they're doing it. That's how they're getting away with it, by leaning into the plant-derived things. I think I even saw one that was milk-derived, which, what are we really talking about there? Having gone through the definition of how it's being used in research and science, deriving an exosome from milk couldn't really be more different from that. So how are exosomes being dealt with in other countries? So the US is a little bit of an interesting one. So exosome products that are intended to treat disease or affect the body's structure or function are treated as drugs and biologics and are requiring pre-market approval. So the FDA has publicly stated that exosome products are not approved and has actually pursued enforcement as well. So the FDA has issued public safety notifications after adverse effects with injected exosome products. They've also sent multiple warning letters to firms that are marketing unapproved exosome products. So basically, no exosome products are FDA approved for any indication. That's according to the US Food and Drug Administration. So the safety concerns that the regulators care about there include the source material, contamination, product variability, lack of standardized potency testing, basically the exact same issues that the EV research community is still working to solve. So that's sort of their take on it. Now, for cosmetics, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because the US, like in other markets, has a category for cosmetics. And whether your product falls into the cosmetics category or the drug category often will come down to the claims that you are making about it. So if a topical product claims to regenerate cells, boost collagen, or otherwise affect structure or function, then it risks being regulated as a drug. So there you go. Cosmetics, however, in the US are not pre-approved. So you don't need to, have, like a piece of paper saying you're allowed to sell a cosmetic product in the US. That's not how it works, whereas it is like that in other markets. So that is the US in a nutshell. But if you are seeing regular serums and creams on the US market that are claiming to regenerate cells because they contain exosomes, that is just a flagrant violation of US FDA regulation. And I would be very skeptical of any brand that is either making those claims itself or asking influencers and content creators to make those claims about their product, knowing that they shouldn't be made. That is just a massive red flag. If you go onto a brand's website and they're making claims like that on their US website, and asking, influencers to say those kind of things about their product, it's just dodgy. There's no other word for it. It's not allowed. They know it's not allowed, particularly if they're a Korean brand, because that's why they're not allowed to say those things in Korea. And Korean brands, particularly ones that are operating in the US market, they understand the FDA's regulations. That's why so many brands have had to come out with, different sunscreen formulations to sell in the US. So it's not like this is not an issue that they are not alive to. Like, they know about this. It's people that work in the cosmetics industry understand this kind of stuff. So it is a red flag, and it, to me, is very dodgy. And it would be one reason that I myself would walk away from a brand, or certainly look twice about a lot of the other things that they're saying if they're willing to make those kind of claims about a product, knowing that they shouldn't be making those claims. So yeah, that's the situation in the US. Now, the EU and the UK, basically human-derived exosomes are prohibited in cosmetics. So human-derived tissues, cells, or the products of human origin are all prohibited in cosmetics, which effectively excludes them from cosmetics in both Europe and the UK. So for therapeutic use, exosome products there would generally fall under biological medicinal products, and that all requires centralized authorization pretty much. So that's, fairly, it's harder to get products, cosmetic products onto the European market anyway. I know for first-hand experience now, because we are going through that process at the moment for our own brand. We are in the process of registering Jellico on the European portal and also on the UK portal, so that we can sell our products in those markets. And trust me, it is a whole to-do for cosmetics, let alone anything that would have human-derived tissues or cells in it. So that's the European Union and the UK. For Australia, this is all regulated by the TGA. And the TGA says that human cells and tissue-derived products for therapeutic use are biologicals. Clinics cannot advertise or supply unapproved therapeutic goods. So that would include exosome therapies. There are currently no TGA-approved exosome therapies. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't ways to use them in Australia, but it just means that is not the approved use. So you might have heard the phrase or the terminology off-label use, and people will use all different types of drugs off-label. So that would be more the kind of thing that we're talking about. But yeah, in Australia, it's the same kind of thing as in the US. It's all about the claims that are being made. So often, whether a product is categorized as a cosmetic or ordinary skincare product as opposed to a therapeutic good or a drug will come down to the types of claims that you're making about it. But if you are making claims about anything to do with cells or regeneration or whatnot, that is just a ticket to TGA regulation. It then falls under the Therapeutic Goods Act, and there's a whole process there that needs to be followed in order to bring that kind of a product to the market. So bringing it back, I guess, to what actually is in today's exosome skincare. So we've already sort of said that a lot of these products that are using human cell exosomes are banned. They're banned in the EU, banned in the UK, banned in Korea. Certainly nothing on the market in Australia yet that has been approved. So we are dealing with plant-derived EV-like particles. And it's just, I guess, not the same thing. So that is, in a nutshell, where we're at with it all in beauty as of the end of 2025, is that more and more markets, more and more regulators are cracking down to clarify that no, brands cannot be using these kind of ingredients in their products. They can't be making these, they can't be making claims around using stem cells, plasma, placenta, amniotic fluid, basically any exosomes derived from human cells. They're not permitted in cosmetics at all. So that is, I guess, where it's at the moment. And I think a lot of brands are really just riding on the coattails. As you can see, it's very difficult to even explain all of this and to explain what they are at a basic level. So there's no, I guess, wonder that so many people are really confused about this. They hear the buzzword and they have seen, claims being thrown around about regeneration and wound repair and I guess cells communicating with each other and talking to each other, and they think, fantastic, that sounds great, that's exactly what I want in my cosmetics. But it is a serious area of biomedical research that has real potential. And in aesthetics, unfortunately, in aesthetics, I think the science is ahead of the skincare marketing. So we know more and have more data and have more understanding of how they work in, a regenerative medicine kind of setting. And certainly, in a clinical setting, particularly if you've just had something like laser or microneedling, we understand a little bit more about how that all works. There is still a lot left to be done, but that is even ahead of what we understand in a topical skincare product that's sitting on a shelf for retail sale. So promising lab and early clinical signals, especially post-procedure, but limited high-quality human evidence for everyday serums. That's pretty much where we're at. There are also big manufacturing hurdles. We spoke about some of the issues with storing them at the right temperature, how you even extract them in the first place, as well as regulatory hurdles. So I think if you are a consumer, evaluate the claims that are being made about a lot of these products with skepticism. I think obviously if you're a clinician, the situation is a little bit different and there are more tools available to you, for all of this kind of thing. I can understand why so many people in the industry are so excited about all of this. I think it is a very, very exciting area. And I can't wait until we have more information for a lot of this. But I just thought I might do sort of like a state of play wrap up on a lot of this, because as always, once we start getting trending SEO keywords and terminology, the internet kind of runs away with it and we lose focus and lose sense of like what it is that we were talking about in the first place. And I think this is a really good example of that. It has become such a trend word, such a buzzword in the industry in 2025 that I don't know if a lot of people realize how much of an amorphous concept this concept of exosomes really is. Like, we really don't know exactly what we're talking about a lot of the time with a lot of this stuff in different settings. It's just like a blanket buzzword, but when you actually drill down into what we do know versus what we don't know and all the intricacies around, regulation and all of this, it becomes clear basically that we've just got more work to do. It's exciting. It has a whole lot of potential, but in terms of, selling people skincare products on the shelf at Sephora or something like that, I think there are many, many, many missing pieces in between. And certainly when it comes to things like plant-derived EVs or, exosome-inspired, exosome-like claims that are being made, I think that's a whole different field again from the exosomes that we are talking about. So look, that is not the simplest thing to explain and to do a deep dive into. I've been mulling over this for weeks, just sort of like, how am I going to explain all of this? This is just so wordy and complicated. And I don't have like a blackboard or anything like that I can point to things, because this is not a visual medium, unless of course you're watching the podcast on YouTube. But even then, there's a limit to kind of what we can do. So I really was like, I don't know what the best way is to tackle this, but I thought, why don't we just look at it through that way and just sort of see like where we're up to with all of this, what the limitations are, and then the regulation, because that's really the piece that is going to be holding all of this up for the time being, to be honest. Like, if the regulators have cracked down, we basically just need more research done then before we can pick up a lot of this stuff. So it is very interesting. It is, certainly I am looking forward to going and having an exosome treatment after like microneedling. I'm really keen and curious to see what the results will be. I haven't myself done any of the topical exosome things, just because I must say I have a bit of a visceral reaction to brands marketing things that an overreach or a regulatory violation. I think probably my background as a lawyer, it just makes me take a huge step back. So I haven't personally been tempted by any of these, just because I'm like, I'm not sure about all of this. But having spoken to doctors and dermatologists who are using this kind of thing in a clinical setting, I think it sounds like we are a lot further down the track with, having some of the answers that we need as opposed to a finished product. So hopefully by the time we do the next episode with this doctor, if I can get him to agree to come on the show, then I will be able to give some first-hand experience as well. But I hope you found this episode interesting. I'm not sure if you guys enjoy this kind of format. You'll have to let me know. Is this just way too much, way too much detail? Is it not enough detail? I don't know. Sometimes when I do these ones, I get people, with different opinions. So you will have to let me know. I will be back in your ears with our news special. I think our last one for the year, to be honest. I think that will probably be the last one. We might have one more episode this year. And then let's see how we go next year. This year just ended up being so much busier than I thought it was going to be. So I just have not been able to keep up our regular schedule. But yeah, I do what I can. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have enjoyed today's episode, I would love if you could leave us a rating and a review. And until next time, I will see you on Style Story.